Hey everybody, welcome to the GMG review. Today we're taking a look at The Silver Bayonet, Italy, The Shades of Calabria, or Calabria, by T.C. Stephen and illustrated by Brainbog, who's done all the illustrations for these lovely books. This is the latest campaign supplement for The Silver Bayonet, which sets a campaign of some specialist units post-Napoleonic War between 1806 and 1811 in Calabria, which is at the time kind of a hard to visit district of Italy that was kind of steeped in the ancient sort of like Greek tradition, you know, like the older ways basically of the region, like classical kind of like stuff. And so what's interesting about this period is that you have sort of a mix of the classical and the Napoleonic horror, as well as a pair of campaigns and new soldiers, and some sort of bespoke unit descriptions on how to recruit your units for this period in this setting. It's a little more its own campaign world, kind of in this microcosm of, it's not really a backwater, it's just a kind of inaccessible region, so it didn't see a lot of the Napoleonic War, although there were some sort of key conflicts that happened there, and the thrust of it is it's relatively untouched, so there's still kind of weird things happening there, and the Necromancer, which is the big bad guy that you're hunting down in both the head-to-head and also the solo campaigns, has been raising acolytes and spirits and bad guys that you're trying to stop. So sort of an echo of the Harvestmen inside this region. Your units have been set to take it on and find out what the hell is going on. And that means that there are also El Briganti, which is the like, evil, they're like sort of like a lawless brigands, but also sometimes servants of the Necromancer that are living in the region you have to contend with as well. And they're sort of the foot troops of this, this evil force that you're trying to stop. So you get new national recruitment lists and an important note on factions. That's what I was talking about earlier at the beginning here, about how to break down your forces. You get a wonderful introduction to the setting itself. It's almost a history setting with the two kingdoms of Naples and stuff in here as well, the French monarchs and the French kingdom of Naples, and of course the non-French like Italians that were sort of trying to restore themselves to power. And so the new soldiers, for instance, you have an agent provocateur from the locals, for instance, and any nationality can have them. This individual may be a member of a secret society, of which there existed many in Italy at the time, or even your own country's intelligence offices. Calabrian clergymen. In Calabria, the clergy are numerous, and the Calabrese, which is very largely religious, follow their every word. Monks are not really champions of the faith. Community is they are kind of like a seedier, violent side sometimes. And as such, tend to be armed, not just with spiritual zeal, but also with the Calabrese weaponry, ready for whatever a necromancer may throw their way. So they're kind of like defenders of the locals. Then we also have such things as the Calabria, like the conscripts of the different nations, light infantrymen, Lupo Monaro, Calabrian werewolves, provincial soldiers of the different sort of like nationalities that were abroad in the area, and then of course the Voltigeur. While technically light infantry, they were elite light infantry of the French army. Voltigeur, I guess I'd have to pronounce it. They were typically shorter than your standard infantrymen, more agile and more acrobatic. Voltigeurs made up the elite skirmishing companies of both light and line infantry and were often called upon to undertake tasks not suited for a full battalion of light infantry, such as scaling walls or acting as a diversion. Interestingly, they're like skirmishers, and they have the nimble rule in light infantry training, which is a new special rule. So setting it in Calabria. So starting your campaign, or Calabria, I should have looked up how to pronounce it. I'm gonna say Calabria because that sounds like the more Italian pronunciation. Starting your campaign, for the armies of Napoleonic age, Calabria was a poor backwater with very little overall strategic significance. It didn't make it unimportant, but during the occupation of Calabria, I keep saying this wrong, battles were being fought elsewhere across the continent involving many nations and thousands upon thousands of soldiers at places such as Eylau and Wagram. As such, Calabria may at first glance seem a fascinating and odd place for your specialist unit to end up. After all, before you start to get your forces in the campaign, your specialist unit must first get to Calabria. With that in mind, here are some of the ways in which a faction-oriented unit might find their way into the region. So for instance, France, you've got like a backstory for showing up. Britain, it's basically like your MacGuffin. It's your old man in the inn that gives you your mission and how you show up. The Calabrese themselves, the Kingdom of Naples, French and allied factions, coalition factions, or a generic faction that's not specifically aligned. So the idea here is to give you like a hook, a story hook as to why you're in the region, some advice on terrain, and then the campaign special rules such as the green mist. The magic used to raise the dead presents with a dense green fog which blankets the battlefield. It obscures visibility to living, though it does not hinder the living dead such as Necromante or the Necromancer acolytes. Therefore, unless otherwise stated in scenarios, these apply. All shooting attacks over 7 inches away suffer a -1 when shooting over 14, it's a -2. This rule does not impact any monster with the ethereal firearms or raise the dead attributes. However, human living enemies with firearms will still be affected by it, like Briganti Brigands and Brigante Chiefs. Unless otherwise stated in the scenario special rules, the green mist will remain in effect for the whole scenario until there's no figures with the raised dead attribute left, and the green mist does not impact any melee attacks. So basically, if there's a Necromancer on the table or a Necromancer acolyte, they're gonna bring green mist with them, which is gonna affect your battlefield. And then the monster activation rules. If the nearest player controlled miniature is within 24 of a Necromancer, that figure will use the raised dead attribute. If the nearest player controlled miniature is beyond 24 of the figure, that figure will use the dark gift attribute. Note these attributes only affect at the start of the activation sequence. After that is determined, the figure can either move or attack based on the rules for monster activations as normal. So basically, anytime one of those models activates, they get to use that attribute and like control people. So it gives you like a puppet master rule for the undead that are on the table. And reactions for the Necromancer acolytes and Il Necromante are handled differently for those listed in their monster reactions. If the target of a shooting attack, a Necromancer acolyte or an Il Necromante will choose dive for cover because they're alive, obviously. And if a Necromancer acolyte or Il Necromante survives a melee attack, it will choose to back off and run away because they're lovers, they're casters, not fighters. Then we got roaming patrols. So these are basically like who's in the region that you might bump into and skirmish with, like deserters, Briganti, French or British forces. And the type of patrol will give you the type of models you're fighting, like conscripts, provincial soldiers, infantrymen, light infantrymen, grenadiers, or voltigeurs if they're French. Riflemen if they're British, and that's sort of like your people that will show on or wander in the table if you have a random event happen. And then alliances. Briganti patrols and deserters are automatically enemies of all factions on the table, but French patrols are aligned with the French faction, therefore any French allied people will immediately join on. So you might actually have some of these people show up and help you during the course of the mission, which I think is interesting. And then we've got the unexpected events table for the solo Calabrian campaign, unexpected event and encounter tables. And these are like random things that can take place over the course of the campaign. Then we have cooperative play and a solo campaign, which takes place over the course of, I believe, 6 missions. There's a prologue and lots of story. I don't want to ruin this for anybody because if you're playing this as a solo player, obviously part of the fun is discovering what happens next. But I will say that obviously you will then fight the Necromancer, or the Il Necromante at the end of the game, and hopefully defeat them. You're trying to assemble an amulet while you go to do so, and there's kind of a cool power-up at the end. The head-to-head scenarios are in here as well that you can play sort of like as fun skirmishes. And of course we get a bestiary for all the new monsters, such as the Brigante and Brigantessa, which are the big like bosses of the Briganti. The chiefs, which are sort of the underbosses, the golems, Il Necromante, which is the big bad, the Necromancer acolytes, which are his followers, and then a nightmare witch, La Janara, I don't know. A possessed boar, because why not? Boars are my #1 concern as of right now. Spectral soldiers and skeletal soldiers. Boars are actually a big deal in the southern United States right now. They're a huge problem. And then we get some new attributes like brittle, things that shatter when you hit them. If struck by a weapon with a heavy trait or struck and shot with a critical hit, the monster is considered to be pulverized into dust. I love that rule. Curse of the Evil Eye, known in Italian as malocchio. Those who receive the curse suffer a string of terrible luck, and it can be dangerous if not remedied. Whenever making an attack action against a figure with this attribute, any roll of a 9 or 10 on either skill or power dice must be re-rolled, and the second result stands. However, if they roll a 1 or a 2, the second roll obviously stays. The second roll stands. Figures with the Great Faith attribute or with a holy symbol are immune to the effects of this curse and will attack and be attacked normally by a figure with the Curse of the Evil Eye attribute. So basically, you can't evil eye somebody who's got the faith. Dark Gifts. Upon activation, if this trigger is relevant, this Necromancer must make a courage check, and if passed, any undead creatures in line of sight and within 6 that had suffered damage recovers 2 health. If for some reason this attribute cannot be used, like everyone's at a range or line of sight, and the Necromancer has suffered damage, they themselves recover 2 health. If no undead are in sight or in range, the Necromancer has not taken any damage. It must then use the raise that ability instead, regardless of distance to any of the player's figures. Ethereal firearms. These are basically guns that can damage people that are ethereal. Light infantry training. This figure doesn't suffer the -1 when moving and shooting, but can only move at speed 4 when utilizing this. So basically you get like a slightly reduced movement, but you can still shoot without any penalty. And then quick to run. Anytime they receive damage or health, then roll a terror check. Basically, they're a little flighty. Paralyzed, if this figure with this attribute causes damage to another figure in melee combat, that figure has succumbed to a horrific nightmare despite being wide awake. They're paralyzed if, like the result from the terror check on the Silver Bayonet rulebook. And then Raise the Dead. Upon activation, if this trigger is relevant, the figure of this attribute may make a roll on the Raise the Dead table to see what shows up. So skeletons, revenants, black dogs, and ghosts can all be brought up. And then finally, rusted weapons. Skeletal soldiers carry rusted weapons, but they won't leave them behind even in the afterlife. However, any guns carried do not function. It's assumed the barrels are full of dirt, crud, and rust, and all mechanisms are broken. They just count as hand weapons. Skeleton, if a skeleton is reduced to 0 health, it collapses into a bone pile, and skeletons destroyed outright via the brittle rule do not become bone piles. Skeletons are only active when a model of the Raised Dead attributes on the table, and when the last model of this attribute is killed, all skeletons collapse into bone piles. A player may, instead of rolling, spend a monster dice from their fate pool to target a bone pile within the Necromancer's line of sight, and that bone pile is replaced with a skeleton soldier at full health. For solo play, the players may spend a fate die to accomplish this. So basically, you can turn bone piles back into skeletons, which I think is very funny. It's kind of like the dry bones in Super Mario. They like brrr, and fall down and then brrr, and come back to life. Oh, skeleton turtle rebuilding itself. And then finally, Sneak. Sneak is a officer skill. Once per scenario, this figure can move unseen if it does not attack this turn and stays its own movement range away from any hostile character or monster. It's like if your movement 6, got to stay at least 6 inches away. This figure stays in Sneak after its movement until the next activation or if an enemy model moves into movement range. While in Sneak, no enemy can draw line of sight to this figure unless they're not behind cover or the target's within movement range of the figure with the attribute. If the figure with this attribute's behind substantial cover, even while it's in melee range, it's assumed to have not been seen. Players are encouraged to agree whether or not place a cover. Basically, if you're behind like a full wall, then you'd still be sneaking. And that's it. T.C. Stephen is a historical consultant focusing on Italian military history from the Napoleonic period to the end of World War II. The perfect person to write this. Besides painting historical figures, his favorite pastime is info-dumping large amounts of historical trivia, as we did at the beginning of this book. This might be the most wonderfully entertaining, I think, just from a point of view of history, Silver Bayonet book that's been written so far. Because obviously, most of us authors writing these Silver Bayonet books, including Joe, we are history enthusiasts, but not necessarily historians. Yeah, T.C. Stephen has really gone above and beyond to really put this in a very specific time and place in Italy, which I find fascinating. And I think he did a really good job of it. So once again, I really enjoyed this just from like the cultural sort of immersion point of view of getting to know more about Calabria. I keep saying Calabria. I'm sorry, Steve. T.C. Stephen is going to be so mad at me for the pronunciation. I'm butchering these words. My 23andMe has 0 Italian in it. I am 100%. I'm as mayonnaise as possible. I'm entirely from the Isles of Britain and some visiting Vikings. So yeah, I highly recommend this, just even from the history lesson point of view. And I think this is probably the best. And I wrote one of these, so this is saying something. I think this is the best anyone's done so far of really taking the historical period and the specifics of the region of like Calabria in particular, and like Italy in general, because that was obviously his sort of like missive, and really boiling it into the writing. So good job, T.C. Stephen. I'm super pumped that we have someone of such a quality writing these books now. Brain Book, as always, dude, just a fantastic bunch of art in this book. I love all of the art that has been done so far for this campaign setting, and I think once again we've gotten just this kind of very cool black and white illustration series in here as well that really puts the flavor in for where and when it's supposed to be. And that's it. So here we go. Another Silver Bayonet supplement for all of you horror Napoleonic enthusiasts, set in between 1806 and 1811. And yeah, and a fascinating exploration of Calabria and sort of the region in general. So you can pick this up, I believe now, digital or in the next couple of days. It's super soon. I just got this, but I think it's the next week or so from Osprey Games. You can check out their website, or of course they also sell digitally through Osprey Games. Usually your local bookseller can get these because Osprey Games is Bloomsbury, which means they're one of the biggest book publishers on earth. So if you want to go to your Barnes & Noble or your Chapters or Indigo, your W.H. Smith, you can probably find it there too. Or of course, digitally online through things like War Games Vault. And I think digital through Osprey Games website as well. So big thanks for watching. We'll see you for more GMG reviews. Thanks, Mash. Happy gaming.